Hi, everyone. It's Andrew Jeffress with the Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure, also known as AII. And for those of you who don't know, the month of August is Energy Month, which means we're investigating all of the energy resources, technology, infrastructure, and public policy that powers our country and the world. During AII Energy Month, I speak with industry experts to gain insight on what they do and their perspective on our nation's energy infrastructure. So today I'm delighted to be speaking with Ildi Telegrafi, who is a senior planning analyst for Con Edison and an adjunct professor at Manhattan College. Ildi, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Andrew. I'd love to give some perspective, insights on the current industry and its practices and where we're going or looking to go in the future.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And honestly, let's just start at the beginning. Tell our audience a little bit about what inspired you when it comes to energy infrastructure.
The inspiration for me is what's happening on day to day in our society. There's a lot of impact due to carbon. There's a lot of growth in population, and just heavy urbanization are some of the drivers that are just changing the way that the energy business functions.
What are the primary challenges that you've encountered in transitioning from traditional to renewable centered energy systems?
There's a lot of inertia in how things are done. As in probably in all industries. The historical normals are hard to move from because they're established through multiple aspects, which I'm sure we'll get into, like engineering, operations, economics, and policy. So that the inertia in those four aspects leads to changes happening slowly.
I can only imagine, especially with the amount of technology that's been changing over time. Speaking of time, can you tell us a little bit about the history of energy systems?
Energy systems have been around for a long time, but the current type of energy systems where we generate the energy from somewhere far away and we transmitted these long distances and distributed locally to the consumers. That's the historical dynamic.
And does that vary across the country in terms of distance, would you say?
It depends on the system, I would say. Different systems have longer transportation systems, other systems or transmission systems, while others might be more localized.
What's the general lifespan of an energy system?
The system itself doesn't have a lifespan, but the components do. So the components, as part of that system, do have lifespans, and it depends upon the technology available at the time, the materials used. It could be somewhere around the year 30 years. So it's relative to your home air conditioner and how you were to use it. So there's relationships just due to material constraints.
Okay, interesting. Well, in terms of technology, are there any emerging tools or methods you're exploring that could further enhance forecasting and planning the design process for these energy systems?
So the design process overall, which includes forecasting, planning, procurement, installation, operations. So all those aspects need to line up to get the ideal results or the results that we're seeking. I won't say ideal. As far as technology, there's a lot of different technologies that have been coming about for a decade or two, and some of them that are more recent. I'll name some kind of off the top of my head. So advanced metering infrastructure, also known as AMI. This is where we get data at the customer level. We're used to getting that data at the aggregate level, which is the system-wide, but now we can go and get it at the customer level and see the impacts locally. Another aspect is SCADA. SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition. So this is in terms of the systems themselves and the devices on that system and knowing what's happening to that system. This used to be at a high level too. So now it's starting to penetrate the system itself. And now we're getting more information from these energy systems much more locally as well. Another aspect is the components itself. For example, in electric energy systems, we're getting distributed energy resources, which means that instead of the energy resource being far away and large, it is localized and it can feed its load locally and through shorter pathways. So that's some of the benefits there. And that was the technology. But I just wanted to mention that this technology is also leading to some changes in the dynamics and policy. For example, consumers are now also becoming producers of energy due to this localized, energy resources, as well as the opening of things like carbon rights for these fossil fuel generators so that we can better establish the economics of the impact of using fossil fuels versus renewables.
Interesting. At the very beginning, you mentioned the results that you desire. What does that look like? Can you go into a little bit more detail about the results that you would like to see?
So we're holistic, we're taking part in the energy transition. So we're trying to transition from fossil fuel energy resources that do have certain limitations. They're not available permanently. They're not renewable in that sense. And they also produce carbon dioxide, which has a negative impact on climate change. This transition ideally would result in a dynamic that's beneficial to all parties involved. Now, what that dynamic exactly looks like, I think hasn't been established yet, or a vision for it hasn't been established yet. But there are new ideas that are coming to the conversation that are trying to align all these aspects and establish that vision of an equilibrium for that new dynamic after we transition through clean energy.
On a global perspective, how much is being shared from the United States to other countries? What best practices are we using in order to further ourselves in this transition?
I would say as much as possible. I've worked with international contractors before, and in places like academia, there's plenty of publications. It's a place where people all over the world publish their experiences, their works, their analysis, and they communicate with one another and they build upon each other's findings. So academia is definitely a place where this conversation has been happening and will continue to happen, as well as industry. Industry is catching on, and so are policymakers, and they're trying to get involved in these conversations to see how best to integrate the technology that has stabilized.
In terms of energy resources, and I know that you spoke with our public policy intern, Isaac, about natural gas. When we're thinking about all the energy resources involved, which ones are people seeming to latch on the most to, if any? Where does the conversation usually get driven?
People are comfortable with the way that things have been happening for them for their whole lives. So it's hard for them to transition from one technology to another unless they're just personally incentivized to do that. The most important driver is economics. If they're going to latch onto a new technology, they're going to want something that's more economical than the past. So some of the technologies that are kind of coming up do seem to be more economical and more beneficial just in general, I would say, are heat pumps. So heat pumps is a technology that I've seen that can perform the same functionality of an air conditioner and a heating unit because it's just the same technology, but in reverse, depending upon what you're trying to achieve. And it can be installed locally, and it works off of electricity.
Is there a substantial difference between the need for heating versus cooling?
That's geographically based,
Yeah.
and it's going to be due to personal needs.
Okay.
Some locations in the world need more heating than others, so it's really the individual's needs and also dependent upon what the outside ambient temperature is. That's what's going to determine how much heating we need throughout the year and how much heating we need, cooling we need throughout the year.
So does that impact the design process at all or no?
It does. You're right. So in terms of capacity, right? The capacity is the language you use to say how much of a commodity we need if we're selecting between multiple commodities. In a dynamic where it's all electric, for example, then you're just modeling the electric system,
Mhm.
and the impacts of heating or cooling are going to be seasonal. So the impacts are going to be due to the peak. So during the winter, even if it's an all electric system, let's say you're going to have a winter peak because that's when you need heating. You're going to have a summer peak because that's when you need cooling. Now, the good thing is that these peaks, they work together in a way in the design process because we only care about the higher of the two. The way that we design currently, where we chase the peak basically in the design process, as that peak is forecasted to increase, we're increasing the capacity of our systems so that we can accommodate more and more energy flow for the time period in question.
How much energy is able, I'm not going to even ask that question. I think I don't think that's really relevant. I was going to ask about, in terms of energy, what does energy storage look like and how much energy can be saved at those peak times to implement in times of need?
I think that's a great question.
Okay.
And that's very germane. I didn't mention it as the technologies. Energy storage systems are actually key to moving forward in this clean energy transition. And I say that because in this design process where we chase the peak, we're starting to enable peak shaving, which means that we're looking at that peak and we're enabling dynamics where these energy storage systems or companies, organizations, entities that own local energy storage systems, they can discharge their energy during that peak, thereby lowering that peak value, and in turn, reducing the requirement to expand the distribution systems because we don't need that much capacity in that moment. By the way, when we say peak, we mean one moment in time, 1 hour of the peak day. It's only one moment in time. So for that one moment, we want to make sure that our entire system can handle that. In other words, if we were to continually reduce that moment in time throughout the system, we would eventually flatten it by moving this energy around using energy storage systems and essentially not need as high of a peak as we currently do.
I know that Isaac did ask you about challenges, but I do want to ask about the challenges specifically in this design process. Could you elaborate?
I would say granularity is one of the challenges. We are currently enabling more granular technology. So we're taking that AMI data that I mentioned earlier and that system data, that granular data, and we're integrating it into our forecasts, our plans, and our operations to localize the impact of this peak, right? Because in operations, which is what keeps the system stable, whether it be gas, electric, it's the operations that keeps the system stable. But to integrate these technologies, it makes it easier to know what's happening at a more local level.
This is obviously a lot of information. And so, what does it look like when you're trying to translate all the work that's being done behind the scenes to the public for them to want to latch on to this and really feel like this is the right way to go?
There is a high technological understanding here. So I think in that aspect, we're in a transition period. And I do agree that the public needs to be educated on what technology are available, how they can participate. Like I mentioned earlier, consumers are becoming producers. So the public will be enabled to participate, not just as consumers, but they can now be prosumers where they can purchase technologies that they already do, like solar panels on their roofs, where they generate electricity at certain times and then consume electricity at other times in tandem with the needs of the operations of that energy system. And this is all to be coordinated through a energy marketplace. A lot of that education is coming from the federal government right now. I would say through things like FERC 2222, but that's coming more towards the public service commissions and not maybe directly to the consumers themselves or the customer themselves, the public themselves.
I do want you to be able to talk about your role as an adjunct professor. Yeah, the floor is open to you.
As an adjunct professor, I get to talk to the next generation of engineers, and these are the aspects I try to enlighten them on, whether it is in the energy industry or some other industry. These are similar concepts and ideas. You know, there's the engineering aspect, there's the operations aspect, the economics, and the policy, and all four of these work together to establish equilibrium. And the analogy that I give them is that of a chair or a stool with three legs and a ring holding it together, the legs. And I say that if engineering is one leg, operations another leg, economics another leg, and policy is that ring, then if you were to change the engineering, maybe shorten the leg, or then you'd have to decrease the legs of the other aspects just to have a stable chair that someone can sit on. So that's why I say the four of those aspects have to play together. And I try to teach my students how to think through the interactions of all those aspects.
What would that look like if one of the components were missing?
Well, actually, just like the stool, the system would collapse.
Yeah.
So if you took a leg out of a three-legged stool, then the stool would just fall. Same thing would happen with an energy system. For example, if the economics don't work, then no one's going to want to operate the system. No one's going to want to engineer the system. If the operations don't work, then no matter how much you pay someone, they can't keep the system running. If the engineering doesn't work, then no matter how much somebody pushes a button to try to operate something, if it didn't make sense that that button is going to activate the right thing, then that system would collapse. So you definitely need all three aspects plus policy to hold it all together.
This next question is going a little bit in a moving slightly in a different direction, but it's a question that I've always wanted someone to answer for me. When we think about transitioning toward, renewables, clean energy, all these things, combating climate change, what do you see as the ultimate goal? What would you guys like? What would you like to see attained in the next 5 years, next 10 years? What kind of real world change would you like to see happen before our eyes?
I think that vision right now is different for every person in the industry.
Mhm.
Because we're in this transition, we're all going to have a different vision of that future. And it's kind of one of the things that I was hoping to drive is finding this new equilibrium, or at least some ideas of what that equilibrium would look like. And I'll give you my vision. So you said 5 years. I think it's a good framing. This vision is also going to be state local. Like from the US, different states are participating differently. I mentioned FERC 2222, that's a federal level order for energy systems, but is every independent operator following it to the exact letter, and what level of integration of these prosumers are they following? So it's going to depend. I would say that my personal vision would be that energy storage systems, I think they're the next key step in this transition, especially for an electric power system to be able to satisfy a peak that's going to be inclusive of electric vehicles and electrification and things like that. Energy storage systems are that component that's going to help the system along in balancing its dynamics. So, like how we mentioned earlier, energy storage systems, they discharge during peak. So they remove the requirement for energy during that peak, and they charge during off-peak times, moments, however you want to say it, and they raise that consumption level during those times that it doesn't matter as much. Now, I say that in a 24-hour cycle, but we're also looking at different types of energy storage systems because most people think of energy storage systems, they think of lithium-ion batteries. So there's different types of technologies that are coming into play, like spinning wheels type storage systems, pressurized storage systems. All these types of storage systems can enable longer durations of energy storage with similar costs to what lithium-ion batteries can do. And they're continually investing in those technologies to try to get them to catch up to lithium-ion. As you know, lithium ion, it's gotten to the forefront of these energy storage systems because of the investments received from other industries like computers, cell phones, because they all use lithium ion batteries. So because it's used in multiple locations, it's just had a greater need and greater investment in its development. So that's why I think that it's at the forefront of this energy storage penetration. But I'm sure we'll see different types of energy storage systems that will change that peak dynamic, that will allow for a new balancing act or a new design model, I would say, one that is trying to flatten the peak rather than just chase the peak.
What do you think are some of the things that your students get the most excited about? Why they want to enter their careers?
I would say that the energy industry or engineering overall, there's a lot of value and honor to it. You're working directly for your fellow people in a way, right? You're providing a service either directly or indirectly. I mean, in a way, we're all providing indirect services, but it's a little bit closer to the people because if you fail, then these systems fail and kind of society crumbles. Without these systems, then there's no way for other systems to happen, like financial systems or baseball games and football games and things like that.
It really is jarring how reliant we are on energy infrastructure. If anything that people can take away from Energy Month is the fact that your daily life runs on energy. You wouldn't be able to do anything without it. Waking up in the morning and check your email wouldn't be a thing. Thank you for explaining what it looks like in terms of planning the design process because that's something I have not thoroughly thought about before.
Andrew, my pleasure. Hopefully we can do it again. This was a great conversation, great questions. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Well, if you guys want to learn more, visit aii.org/energy month. Thank you again for being with us today.